Genius is one who listens to their inner voice and follows their inner vision and obeys, and lets the voice and the vision on the inside be louder and more profound than anybody's opinion on the outside. And that's where they create original ideas and become unborrowed visionaries and go and do something original that makes a difference.
Dr. John Demartini, when I think of you, I think of the fact that if people were to just listen to you for about an hour, they would get more from the conversation or a lecture or a speech than they would from an entire years of schooling. I truthfully believe that, and hopefully we can create that today. I want to ask, out of all of the ologies and rules and beliefs and all of the things that you've learned, you've read thousands of books. What do you think you wish was in the schooling industry that is not?
Well, every individual, regardless of age, because we're all in school, but every individual, regardless of age or gender spectrum or culture, lives moment by a set of priorities, a set of values, things that are most to least important to that individual. And whatever is highest on that list, the highest value, it's the most intrinsic. It's the one that is where we spontaneously are inspired to want to take actions to fulfill it. As we go down that list, we tend to require extrinsic motivation to get us to do the things to fulfill those. I use an example of a young boy who loves video games. Nobody has to remind him or motivate him to do his video games, but the mother may have to remind him to do his chores and homework. So whatever that highest value is where they are able to absorb, retain, and apply information most effectively. So the thing I would love to see in schools, and I've done some degree of getting it into schools, is honoring the individual values that each child has. Because they love learning. Every child loves to learn. They just want to learn what's important to them. And if we respect what that is and care enough about the children or the students to communicate what we feel is essential for them to learn in terms of their values so they feel that they're getting utility out of that information, they will engulf the information, retain the information, apply the information, not to memorize a test, just to pass, but because they feel it's going to be helpful in their fulfillment of their life. So that is underrated in many school systems, which end up being more autocratic and more dictatorial instead of actually inspired educational experiences. So I've had the opportunity to work with young people in middle schools, high schools, and some elementary schools, where we've identified the values of the teachers and then linked the curriculum classes to the teacher's highest values so they were inspired and enthused to want to deliver the material. And then taking the students and find out what their highest values are, because I have a value determination process, and then take the classes and link the classes so they could see how taking these classes is going to help them fulfill what was important to them. Because nobody goes to school for the sake of a class. They go to school to fulfill what they want in life. And then linking the values between teachers and students so it levels the playing field so it's more of a dialogue instead of a alternating monologue. I watched a low pass rate go up to a very high pass rate in matric in a very low socioeconomic area in South Africa by doing that. It went from 27 pass rate to percent pass rate to 97. So I love seeing children's eyes open up and become inspired by knowledge, which is what they want. When they go home, they're going to go and study what they want. But if they have the opportunity to go and see how the classes they're taking can help them fulfill what they want, they'll engage and they'll have less defiant disorder, attention deficit disorder, and all these labels and medications and absences and drug uses and all kind of things that are escape experiences to avoid an unfulfilling learning process. So I would say helping young people and communicating respectfully in terms of young people's values is one of the key things I'd love to see more of in the school system.
Yeah, one phrase that I hear you say often is that your highest value is essentially your purpose in itself. And when I got out of high school, funny enough, was the time when I actually started reading books. The amount of books that I have read over these past few years is absurd. But I took a lot of pride of not reading when I was in school because it wasn't things that I was excited about. So, as you
Exactly.
said, you have a value determining system. What are the questions that you ask? What are the things that you implement to help people kind of get clear on what their highest value is?
Well, I started studying values and their significance when I was 23. I'm 70 this year, so that's how long it's been 46 years. And I asked the question, what is it makes people walk their talk versus limp their life? And unquestionably, it boiled down to the internal drives that each individual had, which was the intrinsic values they had. And I read everything I could get on my hands available on values at the time, and it's limited. I mean, you can devour them all. And much of the values that were being imposed were social idealisms, things that some authorities on the outside thought this is what it should be. And I found that that was a good thing for creating an obedient society, maybe, but not necessarily an awakening genius in individuals and creating, original thinking and really giving people their power. So I had to come up with another alternative way of determining values. And I found out that one, your life demonstrates your values. Every perception, decision, and action you take is a reflection of your values. And the hierarchy of those values will dictate your destiny because it's going to determine where you're headed. You tell me what's highest on your value, I'll tell you where you're headed. So I have 13 questions that I go through. I first look at your proxemics. The proxemics is things that are really valuable to you keep close to you, and things that are not, you discard. So you keep proximal or distal. And I look at what do you feel your most intimate, which is a foot and a half, to your personal, which is around 4 feet space around you that you fully engage in with your senses and motor actions on a daily basis. Like in my case, I'm in front of my computer 14, 15, 16, 17 hours a day. And I do a lot of, online things and research. So I'm working with my hands and looking with my senses and hearing and seeing. I'm engaged with this computer. So if I look at what I fill my space with most consistently, I would say my computer. My cell phone may be second. And then I have books. I have the Encyclopedia Britannica sitting underneath the computer right now. And I pull out a book and read 10, 20 pages and put it back. And throughout the day, I'm doing this. So if I look at what do I engage in and what do I keep in my intimate and personal space most, that is an indication of what I value. Because things that are really important to you keep close to you. And things that are not, if I gave you the hoof of an elephant as a gift and you go, what the hell am I going to do with this? You might toss it, put it in the trash can and take it away, please. But
Right.
if I gave you one of the greatest books on self mastery, you probably would read that, devour that, mark in it, you'd probably devour that and it would probably not leave your space because it's
That day,
something important to you.
of course.
So I look at what people fill their space with mostly in their most intimate personal space. And that's a great indicator of what they value because they keep it close. If I give a woman a diamond ring, she's not going to get it out of her space. But if I give her a dish rag to wash or some soap, she'll probably throw it at me. So space is one. Another one is time. We make time, find time, and spend time on things that are valuable. And we run out of time for things that aren't. Like I just am about to go to a lecture right after this in about an African location by a scholar that I had dinner with last night. And I know I'm going to learn something from this gentleman. So I'm going to make time in between my other, you know, media interviews and things. I'm going to make time for that because I know that's going to be important. But if somebody said, hey, let's have a wine tasting, which I don't drink wine, um, I wouldn't do it. So
Right.
I make time, I find time, and I spend time on things that are really valuable to me. And I find ways of getting out of things that aren't. And we all do this. So time is another great indicator of what you value most. And if you look at how you fill your space and what you spend your time on, you'll find a pattern already emerging. It's revealing something about what's important to you. The third one is energy. You have more energy doing something you love that's high in your value, and you have less energy and you drain your energy. You gain energy or drain energy if it's high or low on your value system. So I want to know, what is it that when you do it, you have more energy at the end of doing it than when you started? And what is it you always have energy for?
Yeah.
I have strange hours. I'm doing things at 3 in the morning throughout the day and 6 in the morning. I mean, I have strange hours because I'm in different countries around the world and I'm
Right.
sailing around the world. So I'm constantly in different time zones, but I make it. I do it. I don't care what time it is. When you're a man on a mission, you find the time, make the time, and you make it happen. And I've got crazy energy for that. I don't run out of energy for doing something you love doing. You tap dance to work, as Buffett says. So, what is it that energizes you most, that you fill your most time with and most space with? That gives you a great indication of what's valuable. The fourth one is money. Uh, I spend my money on things that are valuable to me. When I was in my 20s, I was buying 40 to 70 books a week on average. And I
Yeah.
was going to classes and going to send seminars. And education was the highest value I had, without a question, still is. So I spent the most amount of money on books and seminars and classes and you name it. Anything that would allow me to learn, I was devouring. And I made the money for it. I found the way of getting the money. So if you look at where you spend your money and what you make money for, and that you will prioritize in your expenditure of money, and just look at your bank accounts and look at where your money's going, it tells you what you value. Some people spend a lot of money on food. I don't live for eating. I eat to live. So I'm minimal on food, but man, I'm maximal on learning. So look at where you spend your money. That's the fourth indicator. The fifth one is where you most ordered and organized. Where do you have the greatest degree of order and organization? I'm certain that you have high degree of order and organization around learning, because you're like me. You want to learn and you want to disseminate information. So you've got
Absolutely.
your information knowledge organized. You know where you got it. You know how to get to it. You know what you're going to present. It's organized. So whatever's most ordered and organized is valuable to you. And the next one is where you most disciplined, reliable, and focused. You can count on me to be doing a podcast, a webinar, writing a book, or doing research every day. But you can't count on me to doing pretty well anything else. I haven't driven a car in 33 years. I haven't cooked since I was 24. So
Yeah.
anything that's low on my values, I learned to delegate to specialists who have it high on theirs, and to get and be dedicated to what's highest on mine and find that one thing that's highest that I excel at. The next one is, what do you think about? The next one is, what do you visualize? And the next one is, what is your internal dialogue about how you would love your life to be, that is showing evidence of coming true? So I think about traveling the world and teaching and being and learning and trying to share information on human behavior, maximizing awareness and potential. I visualized that since I was 17. I had a dream to do that when I was 17. And I basically talk to myself. I say I'm an international professional speaker, traveling all over the world, stepping foot in every country in the face of it. I've been to all but 20 countries in the world speaking. So if there's evidence, if there's no evidence, you don't write it. I could say I want to be an international sex symbol, but there's zero evidence, no evidence. So I can't put that down. Those are things people sometimes set up fantasies about what they think is important to them. I want to be financially independent, but there's no evidence. It has to
Yeah.
have evidence. I have evidence of teaching and researching and writing and traveling. I don't have evidence of international sexism. I don't have evidence of being a fast car driver. I don't have evidence of being a wine specialist, but I
Mhm.
do have evidence in human behavior. So you look at where you have evidence of what you think about, visualize, and affirm about how you would love your life that is actually coming true. The next one is, what do you love conversing with other people about most? When you're engaged in a conversation, where do you lead the conversation? And if you get to talk about it, you'll go all night on it. Where's that conversation that you love doing? I'm sure if somebody came up to you and started talking to you about the inner workings of a machine in a portion of a crankcase in your car, you'd probably tune out. but they
Yeah.
start talking about how to maximize human achievement, how to be inspired, then you'll be engaged and talk to them all night. I'm the same way. So you look at where you constantly bring the conversation to and will engage in the conversation and have the most knowledge and want to share in that conversation. That tells you what you value most. The next one is what inspires you and what's common to the people who inspire you that brings tears to your eyes. I've been studying the great philosophers, all the Western philosophers and Eastern mystics, you name it. Anybody that's done something extraordinary on the planet, I love reading about their lives and how they did it and the evolution of what made them, achieve such greatness. And man, I can go there on any day of the week, and I love doing that. And I get tears of inspiration when I'm sharing what I've learned with people and studying people who have done extraordinary things. So I wanted to be one of those type of individuals that did something in the world like they did. So I can see that they're the people I want to feed my mind with, and that's the people I want to be like. So I look at that. Those are the things that brings tears to my eyes. And the last two is what is it that you set as a goal that you persist and consistently go after, that you've been going on for many, many years, in fact, and you keep making progress towards it. May not be complete, but you're definitely making progress towards it. Mine was to travel the world, teach, and write books, and try to be of contribution in with innovative new ideas that serve people. So there's evidence of that. And then the last one is what is it you love to study, read about, learn about most? And when you go to the bookstore, what area do you keep going to? When you go online, what do you keep wanting to watch on YouTube, and what do you want to study, and what are you researching? Look at what's common to it. And I assure you, I've been doing this for 46 years. There'll be a pattern all the way through. And it will be so self evident as you go through what's really important, what your life demonstrates is important, not your fantasies. Because I've asked people, how many of you want to be financially independent? Everybody puts a hand up. How many of you are? All the hands go down except a few.
Yeah.
So what they say they want, what they actually live, I'm interested in what they live. Their actions speak louder than the words, not what just they say, unless what they say is matching what they're showing evidence of. Now, if you take 3 answers for each of those and you get 39 answers out of 13 questions and look at which answers repeatedly showed up most frequent to least frequent, that gives you a really great indication of what your life is showing currently about what's really most important to your life. Now, if you set goals that are congruent and aligned with that and pursue the achievement of what's highest on the value and learn to delegate lower priority things and dedicate to the higher priority things in a way that's sustainably fair exchange where you're remunerated for doing it, you're moving in a direction of self-actualization and inspiration in life.
I will say that every time I have a podcast, I feel like I have more energy than I did prior. Like I need to go on a run to get
Exactly.
all the energy, excitement that I have from this.
Exactly.
And diving into your work, I can listen to all your podcasts that you've been on all day and still feel like I need more from it. And for someone that's just getting started in this space that wants to actualize their potential, there's something that I want to go back to. When you were in first grade, your teacher told you in front of your parents that you would never go really far in life. And you started really young. You had a business at 9 years old, moved out really young. Like you had a childhood that just gave you a lot of evidence. But for someone that maybe doesn't have the evidence or they can't see the evidence, how can they start to carve out the identity of the person that they want to become when there's nothing that backs up that they can do that, if that makes sense?
Well, I've had the blessing to work with all kinds of people, all different ages, and it's there, already in their life. I think you'll find it no matter who you are, if you go through and do a value determination process with them and look at what their life is really demonstrating, they already have it there. But the problem that people face is they compare themselves to others. And by the law of contrast, they devalue themselves if they overvalue others. And they inject the values of those they put on pedestals into their own life. And then they cloud the clarity of what their real calling is and what they would love to do. And sometimes put it on hold for months, weeks, years, decades, whatever. And then someday come back to it. When they get that midlife crisis, they go, I now realize that other people's opinions is not what matters. It's my own dreams now that matter. And so some people suppress themselves and repress their real calling because they compare themselves to others and they want to be like this other person. That's why Ralph Waldo Emerson said envy is ignorance and imitation is suicide. Don't envy other people. Don't try to imitate and be second at being somebody else. Honor you and be first at being you. And I guess I was blessed as a young boy um, with learning difficulties because I assumed I was going to have learning difficulties my whole life. I just assumed that was true. From 7 to 17, I believed that. And then I met a teacher at 17 that catalyzed a new thinking. And in one night, in 1 hour, he shared something that made me believe that maybe I could overcome my learning problems and maybe I could someday learn to read and be able to speak properly because I had a speech impediment. And maybe I could someday become intelligent. That was one of the most amazing nights of my life. The thought that I may be able to become intelligent someday, because I never thought that was going to happen. I was a long-haired hippie surfer guy living in a tent in Hawaii at the time, and I was going to make surfboards and be a surfer. That was my path because I wasn't making it in school. I dropped out of school at a young age. And my teacher did tell me, I'm afraid your son will never be able to read or write or communicate effectively, probably never go very far in life or amount to anything. And that was true. I couldn't read. I couldn't write very well. I was not able to articulate. I had speech impediment since I was 1.5. All of those things were true at the time. But this is the power of the mind. If all of a sudden you set, a determination to do something with your life, you might just surprise yourself with the capacity to way override some of these things you were told you'd never be able to do. Because today, the very thing I was told I wouldn't be able to do, I've excelled at. And that, and I've seen thousands of people do that. It's not just me. I'm not unique. I've seen thousands of people who are told those things. I've seen people. I had a boy. I got to share this. I had a boy come to me. He was 24. I was 26. I was teaching a speed reading course, and he came to my class, and he was partly blind. He had these really thick glasses and a special glass inside a glass to be able to look really close to something. He was deaf. He couldn't hear, very, very little hearing. It was muffled. And he speaking was muffled. And he attended my speed reading class. And I have to admit, my first response is, I don't know how this guy's going to do it. This class, this is not what I normally see here. But he came there and he struggled. And I did that class again at the next semester. He was there again, but he wasn't struggling. He was doing pretty good. He came again, and now he wasn't struggling at all. He was now actually speed reading, even though he had an eye that was damaged and speeching. This kid, when I left professional school, I turned over the speed reading class to him. This kid went on to be a scholar and lectures around the world today and has contributed in healthcare in many ways with innovative ideas. So there's lots of people out there that were told things, and sometimes that's a gift because that's the very thing that eventually they have a desire to conquer. So some people use it as an excuse and become victims of history, and other people turn it as an opportunity and become masters of destiny. It's totally up to their choice of how they're going to interpret these experiences.
Absolutely. I think I've heard you speak on that before, and it's a choice, but it's also to an extent it's hard to consciously choose that, or it's not hard to do so, but once you're aware of it, then you're able to consciously choose it. I lost out of family young in my life, and then I seen it as something that was happening to me rather than for me. And it wasn't until I got into all of the work that we do now that I realized it happened for me, and I'm so grateful that it happened. It helped me just help other people through a different lens. But you had to choose to do so. So, as you said, that night, Paul Bragg, November 18th, 1972. What has stuck with you from that moment? What was the thing that really helped you realize that you could make a change within yourself?
Well, he said that we had a body, we had a mind, and we had a soul. And I guess he had a Christian background, and so he used the term soul,
Mhm.
teleological soul from Aristotle. And he said the body must be guided by the mind, and the mind must be guided by the soul to maximize your potential in life. I went, okay, that's kind of cool. It sounded neat. Didn't know exactly what that meant yet. And then he said that, what you think about, what you visualize about, what you say to yourself, what you feel about yourself, and the actions you take can change your life forever. So if you change your thoughts, you change your vision, you change your internal dialogue, you change the feelings, and you change your actions. Whatever you've been up to right now can be changed into any direction that's inside your heart and what you feel called to do. And then he said, you want to set goals for yourself, your family, your community, your city, your state, your nation, your world, and beyond for at least 100, 120 years. That stuck in me. And then he gave me an affirmation because I got to study with him for the next 3 weeks in the morning. And I said, I asked him when he was about to leave to go back to California, I said, sir, you told us that night at Sunset Recreation Hall that whatever I saw in my vision would become my destiny. And I saw that I wanted to be a teacher and I wanted to travel the world and teach. And I don't even know how to read. I got a speech impediment. And I gave him all my reasons. And he looked at me and he said, you have any other problems, young man? I said, no. He said, that's not a problem. Just say to yourself every single day from now on that you're a genius and you apply your wisdoms. Just say, I'm a genius and I apply my wisdom. He made me say it over and over again until I could close my eyes and feel it a bit. And he says, now say that every single day and never miss a day for the rest of your life. And sooner or later, the cells of your body will tingle with it and so will the world. Well, I can state with certainty I've never missed a day. I later asked my mom, what exactly is a genius? And she said, people like Albert Einstein and Da Vinci. I said, well, then get me everything we got on those guys. I want to learn about those guys. And then I realized that a genius is one who listens to their inner voice and follows their inner vision and obeys and lets the voice and the vision on the inside be louder and more profound than anybody's opinion on the outside. And that's where they create original ideas and become unborrowed visionaries and go and do something original that makes a difference. So this man, with his simple teachings, made me believe that night that I could overcome my learning problems. And if it was, I had one setback months later, but once I got past that setback, there was no turning back. I was on a roll. Can I share a story? I had
Please.
I had this young man that this therapist was working with, and he was an abandoned child. That's the story. Put into an orphanage and then finally into a foster family.
Yep.
And the foster family was trying to get help for him because he was moping around. He was not inspired. The parents tried to give him so much to compensate, which made him even more dependent. And he was really feeling like he was rejected. So he was running the story, I'm a reject, and this kind of thing. So I said, so you felt like you're an orphan and you felt like you're a foster child and you've been abandoned. Yeah. I said, you know how to look up stuff on the internet? And he goes, yeah. I said, you got a phone? He goes, yeah. Let's look something up. So I made him look up something. And it was the most famous people and celebrities in the world that started out as orphans and abandoned and ended up in foster care. Starting with Sir Isaac Newton, who wrote Principia and Gravity and, one of the most famous people in history. And I made a list and I showed him this list on the internet. And there was more than one list. So we went through, there's like 700 famous people that have started that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to him, looks like you're in this category. You're one of the people that are supposed to make the biggest difference in the world and change the course of history. And he looked at all those names, and any name he didn't know, I made him look up that name so he could understand the impact that each of these people had. And we spent maybe 45 minutes, maybe more. When I was through, his whole perspective was, I'm special. I've been given a gift. I'm here to do something. I'm in that category. Now, in 45 minutes, that man changed his direction in life. That's how powerful some idea can happen and change you. He now, instead of being angry at his family, now wanted to go out and do something extraordinary with his life. And I said, find out what you spontaneously do that you love doing and think of a problem you can solve in the world, and you'll end up in that category. If you look and focus on your own problems, instead of solving problems for the world, you'll be wallowing in your pity party and trauma drama instead of doing something that makes a contribution. So he got focused. And I'm telling you, from age 16 to now 20s, This kid has skyrocketed. It had nothing to do with what happened to him. It was his perception of what happened to him. And that changed by the right questions. That's why the quality of our life has a lot to do with the quality of questions we ask. How is this helping you fulfill what your mission is? So I'm a firm believer that it's not what happens to you, it's what you decide to do with it.
It's the number one reason that I started this podcast was recognizing that it's all a story. And if we're unaware of that story, that's our life. That is what life is going to be. But when we're able to break out of that story, we're change our perception. Like you say, there's no one-sided event. There's no one-sided thing that we get from things. There's always positive, there's always negative. And recognizing that and being able to actualize that in our life, it can happen so quick. And it happens so quick for me. You have written 40 plus books, like 200 plus manuals and textbooks, and like you've written a lot and learned so much. What has taught you the most about yourself, whether it was something that you learned or something that you wrote?
Well, there's many things. I don't know if there's one, but if you said the most, I'd say probably an exercise that I did 40 years ago. I noticed that whatever I was saying to others was partly uh, boomeranging and really meant for me.
Mhm.
I would say, "Did you hear that?" And I go, "I need to hear that." And I kept thinking about what I was saying to other people, and I realized, God, that's all about me too. And then I realized that when I was judging other people, I had that too. So I decided instead of waiting for me to have emotional reactions by judging other people, I thought I'd do a preemptive strike by going to the Oxford English Dictionary, which is the largest dictionary I could find, and underline every positive, every negative behavioral trait I could find. So anything to do with it, something you could judge in somebody and look up to or down on, I underlined it in the dictionary. And out to the side in that little margin, I wrote the name of the individual who displays that to the highest degree that I knew. So let's say inconsiderate or arrogant or whatever it be. I write out who do I know that's most arrogant and who do I know that's most inconsiderate in my life. I was, this was 40 years ago, so I was 30 about the time. And then I went through the dictionary, and one by one, I found 4,628 different individual traits that I underlined. And I wrote these out to the side, the names. And then I went inside myself and I asked, all right, John, go to a moment where and when you perceive yourself displaying or demonstrating this same specific trait, action, or inaction. And where did you do it? When did you do it? Who did you do it to? And who perceived you doing it? Now, I just basically wanted to know where I did the same thing. Because in Romans 2, in the biblical New Testament, it said, beware of judging other people, because whatever you judge, you do the same thing. So I went and I found every one of those traits inside me. And I realized that I was both nice and mean and kind and cruel and honest and dishonest and considerate and inconsiderate and forthright and hesitant. And I had every possible trait I had in different moments in my life. And what that did is it made me realize that whatever I see in others is inside me, and whatever I judge in others is I'm judging in me. And that was a major breakthrough for me to realize that ultimately each of these traits are neither positive nor negative. And they're not something you're going to gain or lose. They're inherent inside you, but the hierarchy of your values dictate the form in which they're expressed. And when I realized that, I realized I don't need to self-improve. I don't need to get rid of something in my life. People are trying to get rid of half their life to love themselves, and they don't need to gain something. It's already there. It's just in a form that they're not seeing, and they're too proud or too humble to admit that they have it when they see it in others, and they react with admiration or despise to others because they're not honoring it in themselves. So that exercise, which took a long time, was one great exercise on reflective awareness, because the highest level of awareness is reflective awareness, not reflexive awareness. Most people live in reflexive awareness, and they reflex and react before they think, instead of reflective awareness where they think before they react. And that was a very useful tool. One of the most significant contributions in the development of what I'm doing today, and also helping me love and appreciate people regardless of what they've done.
The questions are everything, right? If we ask different questions, we're going to get different answers. My life changed when I stopped asking, why is this happening to me? And I started asking, how is this happening for me? It automatically just made me look through a way that I would get a positive from it instead of trying to find another way for it to tear me down. You have a lot of questions in a lot of different modalities that you work through. What are questions or things that you bring up on a day to day basis that you almost ask yourself to kind of stay in alignment with your highest value?
Well, that's a great question, and I found out that when you identify what your values are and you prioritize your life and you stick to the top priorities and you give everything lower on the priorities to other people who have it higher on theirs. So you
Mhm.
delegate all lower priorities and dedicate the highest priority. You have less drama, less emotional baggage, less stuff to judge because you're more objective. You're in your executive center, you're more reasonable, and you're more understanding and more appreciative of life. So I stick to that. So I don't have all the drama. I delegate drama to other people, basically. And I don't have those things that normally stress people because I don't surround myself with it, I guess. I say thank you, but no thank you to things that are low on my values, and I've hired people to do it, which gives me the responsibility of doing something that contributes to others with what I do.
Mhm.
So I make sure that I'm making the income to generate to be able to pay for those people that I'm delegating to. And that gives an increase in job opportunities and the economy and trade. And there's a lot of pluses out of people being authentic. Whatever's highest on your value is your ontological identity and your authenticity. So if you give yourself permission to go after it, in my case, teaching, I my life simplifies. But if I'm doing lower priority things or allow something to come in and not say thank you, but no thank you to people and inject some expectation, then I use my Demartini method, which are a series of questions to neutralize that. So I ask the question, what specific trait, action, or inaction do I perceive this individual displaying or demonstrating that I admire most or despise most? Because the things that distract us from being present and purposeful is some admiration or despise, something we have an impulse toward or an instinct away. And anybody who's trying to go to sleep at night, if they're highly infatuated or highly resentful, they can't sleep. They're distracted and they have intrusive thoughts. The moment they actually ask the question, what specifically is it that I'm admiring or despising, and identify it, and then go inside and ask, all right, John, go to a moment where and when you perceive yourself displaying or demonstrating these specific traits. And where are you? When are you? Who are you doing it to? And who perceives you that way? If you own what you see in them, you automatically realize, who am I to judge them? I'm doing the same thing. And then if I go and take the trait that I thought was I despised or admired, and I go to a moment where and when they displayed that trait that I despised, and in that moment, and from that moment now, how has it blessed me? How is it helping me? Because we're sometimes trapped in moral hypocrisies and rigid absolutes instead of relativities and understanding situations. And if I ask, how is it helping me? And I find the benefits to it until it equals the drawbacks, it has no impact on me.
Mhm.
I run me instead of it running me. And if I find the downsides to what I thought was something I admired, I calm down my infatuation. And when I'm no longer infatuated or resentful and impulsive or instinctual, I'm no longer distracted from being present with what I really want to contribute. And so I'm now free to get on with back into doing what's really priority. Then I go in and identify where I've done it. And I look at how has it been a benefit to the people I've done it to? And how is it a drawback to people I've done it to? And I level the playing field in the self judgment of pride and shame, which are inauthentic expressions of who I am. And I balance that out. And then I go in and ask the question, where and when do I see this individual displaying or demonstrating the exact opposite behavior? Because it's easy to label somebody and make them absolute. They're always that way. No, they're not. They're a human being. Their spouse doesn't see them that way. Other friends don't see them that way. It's just the dynamic between us has led us to think that, and we biased our interpretation. So I make them look for where they do the opposite behavior. So all of a sudden, I take the label off them because sometimes we want to label people instead of love people. And then I go and find out at that exact moment when they did that, who is doing the opposite? Because if I'm enamored and infatuated with a trait, I need the opposite pole of that magnet in my life to balance me out. So if I get addicted to being protected, I attract an aggressor. If I get addicted to being peaceful, I attract the aggressor or the warrior again. Whatever I get addicted to, which keeps me juvenilely dependent and not growing, I attract its opposite to reestablish my growth again, to make sure that I become precociously independent again. So I go and ask questions that allow me to see that the thing that I thought that I judged was an illusion that I had projected. And then I go into another question. I ask, if they were to do what I had wished they'd have done at the moment, what would have been the drawbacks? Or if they had done the opposite of what I admired, what would have been the benefits? And I balance out my delusions that I'm basically comparing them to. And when I get through with that, all I have is deep appreciation, love for this person and myself. And I find when I do that, I'm now poised and present and purposeful and patient and productive and prioritized. And that's where I tend to excel.
The idea that comes to mind for me when just all of the work that you do when you were younger, you minimized yourself because you had this idea that someone told you that you'd never be able to read, write, communicate effectively, etc. And it seems as though most people in the world minimize themselves more than they maximize themselves. At least that is my preconceived notion. So how can we get to a point where we no longer minimize nor maximize, but just find ourselves in a state that we appreciate who we are rather than minimizing ourselves so much and putting others on a pedestal? Because I find that that's the common reason that most people don't step into a life that they love or go after something that they really enjoy is because they don't believe they're either worthy or capable of doing so. And that's the emphasis of this podcast, is really to help people unlearn those beliefs that stop them from taking the action to create a life that they love, rather than, I guess, playing not to lose is a kind of way I like to see it. Like, how can we play to win rather than play not to lose?
Well, there's a thing called the moral licensing effect, and almost everybody's experienced it, whether they knew it or not. Most likely, you in your life have gone out and done a workout, for instance, gone out and
Mhm.
exercise or whatever. So this morning I did a workout. Let's say we go and do a workout. We really, get our abs in shape and get some tone and our butts looking good and this kind of thing, right? We're really proud of the way we look. Well, the moment we get proud of what we do, we create the moral licensing effect, which is a homeostatic mechanism in the brain, an interoceptive response in the brain to automatically give ourselves permission to do something we're ashamed of. So that night, we give ourselves permission to have that chocolate pudding or to go out and have that extra bottle of wine or a glass of wine, or we overeat. And then we go, why did we do that? Well, because we were proud of what we did and we got in above equilibrium, which is inauthenticity. And the
Mhm.
second we go into pride, we give ourselves permission to do something to try to equilibrate that back into authenticity. So we balance the pride with the shame act to get us back into the center. And if we go out and do something, let's say we pigged out and we did something that we were ashamed of, we automatically have more motivation to do something we're proud of the next day. So now we'll go work out. And we get in this yo-yo cycle. And many people are in this yo-yo cycle. So the very first question when somebody says, I keep beating myself up, what do I do? I ask them, where are you building yourself up? Where are you thinking you're superior to other people? And at first, I'm not. I said, look again. Can't have one without the other. But one's hidden, one's unconscious, the other's conscious. One they're running the
Right.
story of, one they're not aware of. And so I ask them, where do you think you're superior to somebody? And then they find out, well, the way I eat is superior, or the way I dress is superior, or who I hang out with is superior. And they start to find out where their arrogance and pride is and why they have to have the self depreciation to balance it, to keep them centered. So I make them aware of both of them simultaneously, which then dissolves both. I also make them look at where do they subordinate to somebody else that they're putting on a pedestal and minimize themselves and feel too humble to admit it. And I worked with this supermodel, was voted one of the most beautiful women in the world, and she couldn't see her own beauty because what she was doing is she was comparing her hair to one of the models that had thicker hair. Now, the overall package of the other model wasn't more attractive, but her hair was. Then she was
Mhm.
taking the breast of this woman and comparing herself to the breast. And then her butt here, and her thighs here, and her abs here, and her smile here, her teeth here. And she kept comparing herself to the highlights of certain people, not the total of everybody, and was not able to appreciate her beauty, even though she was voted one of the most beautiful women in the world by many magazines. because she had dysmorphic syndrome, body dysmorphic syndrome. And that's because she compared herself to other people that she put on a pedestal, in part, not whole. And this, we do this constantly. We're going around, we walk in a mall, and we see somebody we think is more intelligent, or we think they're more successful, or we think that they're more, wealthy, or they think that they're more stable in their relationships, or more socially connected on Facebook, or more physically fit, or more spiritually aware because of the way they're dressed or something. And then we compare ourselves to these people that we exaggerate instead of seeing both sides of them. And when we only see the upside of them, all we can see is the downside of us. Now, the purpose of that self-depreciation is a necessary feedback mechanism to let us know that we're either exaggerating ourselves and we're unconscious of it, or exaggerating somebody else and unconscious of it. So find out who we've got on a pedestal and who's being reminded, who are we, when we're infatuated with somebody, it's because we have that inside ourselves, but we're sometimes too humble to admit it. So if I
Mm.
go and find out where you're exaggerating yourself and where you're exaggerating others, and then find the downsides of those two and bring them back down and level the playing field, the self-depreciation lifts and dissolves away. Self-depreciation is a necessary feedback mechanism guiding you to authenticity once it's understood in its totality.
I don't think people see that, right? It's the one-sided idea of things that we all have in our mind of it's only this way. The absolutes is something that so many of us just get caught up in too often. And one, I want to switch gears a little bit because you were obviously in the secret, and I assume that it's a big thing that comes up in a lot of conversations. Is like, where do people go wrong when it comes to manifestation, the law of attraction, just trying to attract things into their life? When you see what is the common thing, you've worked with thousands and thousands of people, where do you think people misunderstand what law of attraction is in itself?
Well, um, the most common secret left out of the secret was, don't waste your time on anything other than what's really highest on your values. Because many people say, I want to be financially independent, and they don't have a high value on wealth building.
Mhm.
They don't have a value on making sure that they serve ever greater numbers of people with a business so they have a source of income. They don't have a value on managing the business so it's efficient, effective, so it's profitable. They don't have a value on saving in progressive portions of it so they actually build up a cushion. They don't have a value on investing and leveraging investments to help make sure that the money's working for them. They don't have a value on accumulating because they want immediate gratification, buying consumables that depreciate in value. They don't have the values that actually match the fantasy that they've set for themselves. So finding out what you really value and setting goals that are congruent with that, or changing values to match goals because they have to be congruent, is the first step. That's the first step. Don't waste your time on something that's not really valuable, or don't waste your time unless your values are congruent with what your goals are. And I can do both of them. I train people in the breakthrough experience on how to change their values to match goals, or change your goals to match values. But unless they're congruent, you're not going to maximize your fluency and congruency in your achievements. The second thing is that whenever you are living by your highest value and congruent with that, actively, consciously, the pulvinar nuclei in the thalamus, which is a relay station from sensory input in the spinal cord and the brainstem up into the cortex, takes in information and filters it out and gatekeeps information. And the only information that goes into the cortex that becomes conscious is the most important. For instance, if you're a 35-year-old woman and you're walking in a mall and you have three beautiful children under the age of 5, and your highest value is mothering and those children, you'll walk in a mall, you'll see children's clothes, children's health items, children's entertainment, children's education items. You're not going to see business items. You're not going to see other things. You're going to see what's lines with what's highest on your value. Now, you may have a husband whose highest value is being an entrepreneur. Now, if he walks in a mall, and even though he's got 3 kids, he's not going to see children's clothes and children's education. He's going to see business materials, computers, maybe a suit, anything that he thinks is going to give him an advantage in his business, he's going to notice, and he's going to just bypass the rest. So the synchronicities and the resources that occur in our life, to the degree that we're congruent, we're able to see the synchronicities and opportunities that surround us. And therefore, we think we're at the right place at the right time to make the right deal with people because we're able to see it because we filter in information that really aligns with what we value most. And almost anybody can do this experiment. and I encourage anybody to do this. Go it if you're in business and you have, let's say, some inactive clients or patients, and you go and make a list of those that haven't been in business with you for 6 months or longer, and just pull out their files and pull in, get their names, and just visualize and say and think and imagine these individuals in your mind. If you go through and reactivate in the file, 20% of those people you'll run into, they'll refer, they'll call, you'll end up at a grocery store talking to them, they'll in a mall, these amazing synchronicities occur because your innermost dominant thought is to be of service to people. And when you do, their innermost dominant thought comes to get the service. And I've proven that with health professionals in the 80s. We did that, and 20% of the people we went and took out of inactive patient files showed back up in a week or ran into that individual within a week. And we kept stats on that and records on that. So there is some sort of resonance, and we're learning more in neuroscience about how this might work. We know that when somebody has an emotional feeling, there's certain pheromones that are being released, aromatic compounds released, and other people around them can pick them up and pick up on those emotions. We know that there's also people that have a tremendous amount of appreciation, love for each other, can sometimes think about somebody and all of a sudden call, and the other person's about to call them, and they have these synchronicities. So there's not only a neurophysiological thalamic response that's increasing the probability of taking advantage of opportunities, but there's also some sort of resonance mechanism that probably in the next decades to come we'll have a greater appreciation of how and why it works. But it definitely is out there, and it's too frequent to ignore, but it's not frequent enough to put a science to it yet. But it's coming.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. The work that you do is just it's admirable to say the least with how much excitement that you have for this work. And I've spoke with a lot of people that have been doing this kind of work for decades, and it seems like the more that they're in it, the more excited they are about it. When you were 9 years old, you had 9 employees doing lawn stuff. It seems as though your dad employed a lot of responsibility on you from a young age. You had to pay for the time for the things that you had to use. You had to pay for being at home. There was a lot that you took on at a young age, and it seems as though it really carved the person that you are. What habits or characteristics do you think that you took on young that still stick with you today? Because I kind of like to see this podcast as a way of almost a shortcut for people to help learn from the people that took a lot of time to do something and almost shortcuts so they don't have to go through all the trial and error to get to that point. So what are some of the things that you still use today that maybe you took on when you were younger?
Well, you just mentioned the thing about the little uh, business that I made when I was 9. I wanted to buy a baseball, a glove, and a bat because baseball was important to me.
Mhm.
And I went to my dad and I said, how can I earn some money to buy a baseball glove and a bat? He said, well, have you mowed the yard? Yes, sir. Have you edged the sidewalk? Yes, sir. Have you swept the garage out and the driveway? Yes, sir. Have you trimmed the hedges? Yes, sir. Have you done all the weeding? Yes, sir. Have you tightened all the tiles on the side of the house? Yes, sir. Have you, done my shoes and polished my shoes? Yes, sir. Have you done all your chores in your room? Yes, sir. He says, well, son, I don't have anything else needs to be done. I'm not going to pay you unless you do something of value. So I suggest you go to the neighbors and see if you can find something to do for them.
Mhm.
And that was a really great thing that my dad did. So I went down the street and I found an unruled yard. It was a mess. And I said, I would like to edge and mow and this and that. And the lady said, how much? And I didn't know anything because I didn't know what to charge. But I just pulled a number out and she said, well, that sounds fair. And I did the work and I spent the day doing it and I made 25 bucks, which is a lot because I did all the hedges. I mean, I got bee stings, I got blisters, I got sunburn, I got everything. But I made $25, which was a lot of money in 1963. And man, I was able to buy my bat and glove and ball. And my dad said, well, how did you do that? Where did you get the money to buy that? I told him what I did. He said, what equipment did you use? I said, well, the equipment in the garage. He said, son, I got to tell you that when you use people's equipment, you have to pay for that. That's a thing called depreciation.
Mhm.
And I said, well, what's that? And he said, well, you wear and tear my equipment. So you got to pay me for that. So I said, well, I've already spent all the money. He said, well, you got to go and do some more jobs and then pay me up. And so he did make me accountable. And I started paying that. And then I realized that my returns were less. Instead of making $5, now I'm making $3.50 or something, or
Mhm.
$4 now. And so I'm working, 20% and getting 20% less, you know. And then one day a kid came by on a bicycle and he saw me mowing this yard. And a crazy idea came to my head. I could get this kid to push this lawnmower. And I just tested out a price. I said, if I give you 50 cents, would you like to make 50 cents? Yeah. 50 cents was big in those days. And he said, yeah. So I got this kid and I showed him how to do it. I trained him on how to do it. And he started doing the lawns. And I got another kid to do edging, another guy to do sweeping and raking for 25 and 25. And so I then got some more kids. And then I got the Malas and the Zubrods equipment across the street. And they called my dad and they charged the same fees. And so I had a little business. And then my dad said, you've been an enterprising young man. I'm really inspired to see what you've accomplished, but you're not saving any of it. And I said, well, but what's, I didn't understand saving. It didn't make sense. So he got me these little coin collection papers that you wrap up and fold and you put nickels and dimes and quarters and pennies in.
Mhm.
And then he also got me a piggy bank, a metal piggy bank, which is a combination piggy bank, which is a big bank to put it in. That was 1963. That bank is sitting in my office on the 52nd floor of a tall building in Houston, Texas, Williams Tower.
Wow.
It has never been opened since 1963. It has the original coins that were put in there in 1963 and still has the wrappings to wrap the coins in. I've left it there as a memory and a reminder to think long term. I've never touched it. Now, the coins are worth probably a small fortune today because I got 1901 and these kind of things, Buffalo
Yeah.
nickels, and I got all kind of stuff in there. But I've never touched that as a metaphor to think long term and not immediate gratification, because immediate gratification costs people's lives. Long term vision pays. Those are the vision flourish, as they say. I also did this. My dad said, I'm going to start charging you now to live at home, because that's the real world. The real world is you don't just make money and then you get to keep it all. You have to pay for your home and clothing and food and rent. I'm trying to train you on how real world is out there.
Yeah.
So he charged me $750 a week to live at home, which at first I thought rats. But he said, he sold it to me. He said, but I'm going to tell you, now you've bought your freedom. Now you're an independent young man. I only have one restraint on you. No matter what, you have to be home at 9 o'clock at night. That's the only restraint you have. You can go anywhere you want on your bicycle. You can do anything you want. You are a free man. You've earned it. You just only have to be home at 9 o'clock. That's the only thing I asked you to do to make sure you get enough sleep to go to school. And
Time.
so I just started traveling everywhere I could because I wanted to explore. And I can state that very few kids seem to get that. And I really believe that if I hadn't had learning difficulties, I wouldn't have got that. The learning challenges and the speech impediment and the inability to read, I think inspired my dad to want to make me street smart.
Mhm.
And so I think he was trying to prepare me for the world in a different way. And he knew that I wanted to, be independent that way. So I'm grateful for that. My mom and dad had, I guess they didn't have any alternative. That's the wisest thing they could think. And they saw they were training me to be independent at a young age and gave me a lot of accountabilities. And that you try to do that today, and sometimes kids are still at home at 30 and they're not taking advantage of that. I no one was at home at 30 when I was a kid. You were out of there at 16, at 18 or something. You were trying to get out and be independent and prove that you could stand on your own feet, kind of thing. But that's a much different thing today because we're living longer and people are going to school longer and this kind of thing. But yeah, my parents, my dad blessed me with that. Now, when I left home and it started going on the streets, uh, a lot of my parents' friends thought they were crazy and they really gave them a hard time about it. But my mom and dad had this sense that we've trained them. They were trained in the 50s with what they call the formative years. And whatever's been trained in the first 7 years of their life usually sets the pace. That's what they were taught. So my dad
Mhm.
kind of had confidence that we've done what we can to train him on how to stand on his own 2 feet. We believe he'll make it out there. And I thought that was something. They endured the criticisms of the populace around them. And then later, when I ended up coming back and doing well, many years later, those people then said, well, we didn't know you were going to make it. So you turned out okay after all, kind of thing.
Absolutely. It was not a problem, but it was a privilege. And I heard so much of that story when you were younger, and it's again admirable to see the person that you've become and the work that you're doing. It's profound. There's one last question I ask every guest, and my question to you is, what belief are you currently unlearning?
What belief am I unlearning? I don't know if I have a belief that I'm unlearning that I'm aware of right now. Maybe if I contemplated that longer, I think I shed so many delusions. It was Paul Dirac, the Nobel Prize winner, who wrote the book called The Principles of Quantum Mechanics in 1947. He said that it's not that we know so much, it's we know so much that isn't so. And I guess I was blessed by age 28 to 30 to start challenging paradigms. So if you would have asked me at 28, I would probably say a lot. But now there's certain universal principles. I always say universal laws are unviolatable, but human laws are unlivable. And I don't pay much attention to the human moral traditions as much as I do universal laws as it relates to human behavior. And so I don't have anything that I think I need to unlearn so much. Not that I know everything. We can't possibly know everything, but it's more of I just have a thirst for wanting to continue to expand what I do know. I always tell people start with what you know and let what you know grow, but don't sit there and compare yourself to others. If you compare yourself to others and think, well, they have knowledge that I don't, you'll minimize yourself and think, oh, I regret I didn't know that. But if you compare yourself to your own actions to your own highest values, you don't have those comparisons. You don't have that self depreciation, and you know that they're not smarter than you. They have a different smarts. You know, I was doing writing a book on cosmology and astrophysics and the origin of the universe, a big textbook, two-volume textbook on it, and I was reading Stephen Hawking.
Mhm.
And I sat down, and every time I came across a trait that I thought was pretty admirable, I'd immediately go, where do I display that and demonstrate? And made sure I owned it all. And literally 7 months later, I got asked to be in a movie with him. And I really think that we, at the level of the essence of our authentic self or soul, nothing's missing us. At the level of the existence of our physical senses, things appear to be missing in us. We're fooled in the phenomenological world by our senses, and we're sometimes too proud or too humble to admit what we see in others inside us. And therefore, we don't stand on the shoulders of giants. We minimize or exaggerate ourselves and put people up or down, and then try to change ourselves into others or others into ourselves, which is futile instead of utile. And I find that's kind of a thing of the past now. I mainly focus on comparing my actions to my own highest values and delegating everything else so I don't have any of those distractions. And I don't need to compare myself to anybody because I already know that whatever I see in other people is me. So I think that has an impact on that question. But I could maybe
Uh,
think and reflect deeper, and maybe I'd find something that I'm overlooking. But I think that's true.
No, we'll just have to have you on in the future again. Dr.
Great.
DeMartini, thank you so much for coming on the show. Where would you like to direct people?
Well, anytime somebody wants to go and find out about me, if they go online, if they can go on to drdemartini.com. There's a value determination process, which is free and private, that they can do that's worth doing. I really believe it could help people. It's helped a lot of people. And then there's also just on the media section there's just thousands of interviews and, YouTube things. And yeah, they can find out where I'm at, what I'm doing in case that's of value to them. And I'd love to do what Paul Bragg did for me with as many people as I can while I'm alive. What he did for me was great, great, great opportunity. And so, that's what inspires me. I don't know, what is your age? Just out of curiosity, you're a young guy. What is your age?
Yeah, I'm 20. I started this when I was 17.
Yeah, because you remind me of the guy when I was 17 and I met Paul Bragg. Um, I was 17. He was much older.
Mhm.
And I thought to myself that day, someday when I'm his age, I want to pass the torch and find me a 17-year-old. And when I look at you, I see that individual that I envisioned when I was 17, or I envisioned someday having that. And so, it really means a lot for you to say that you've taken the time to go through all this and learn these things, because you obviously have, because I can tell by your questions. And that means a lot, because that's like me getting the opportunity to have that 17-year-old guy, even though you're 20 now, um,
Yeah.
doing that. And so that means a lot. So thank you for having me on your show.